So the first thing you need to know about animation is that we have 4 boxes that you need to know about. The first one here is the very beginning of the whole time in the scene. The number 1 here refers to the beginning of that specific time that I am zoomed into, meaning that I could start the animation from like maybe frame 46. So this is going to be there, and then I want to focus maybe from 46 to 86. And that's going to be the range that I have right here. But that doesn't change the maximum amount of frames that I have in the scene. Also, if you want to extend that amount of frames, you can go type in 400, for instance, and that's going to increase the maximum of that timeline to 400. It's also very important to know how many frames per second you are requested to do from the client or teacher or whatever project you're working on. So this is where you go here and change it from there. If you're not using this version of Maya, typically you want to go to the icon here that shows a gear chasing a guy trying to cut it in half. Kind of a brutal logo if you ask me. Some of the things that I want to mention here you might have issues later with if you don't change, but maybe I will go to them when they happen so you would understand them very clearly in context. So I'm gonna go back to this menu later, but I'm gonna go one by one, step by step. So the time slider here, and that's gonna be here, the area where you can change the frame rate. In previous versions of Maya, they used to have 2 tabs or menus or subcategories for settings. It's good that they put it this way now, but now this is the one that you wanna go to, time slider. Okay, save. Now what I want to do is to move this cube from here, point A to point B. Okay, let me undo, and I'm going to go here, modify, freeze transformation. So it would all be zeroed out on translation and rotation, and it would be on 1 for scale. So now any animation that I do would be easy to copy these numbers or calculate them, whatever. So for any object, as I mentioned, we have these channels. So there are 2 ways of animating things. If you go to the specific timeline spot or frame and hit S on the keyboard, is going to key everything, even including the visibility. Okay, so this is one approach. Another approach, which is what animators do. I'm gonna undo this. So W is the shortcut for what? For translation. And then we have also the E, which is shortcut for rotation. And then we have the R, which is a shortcut for scale. So W for translation, right? So if you click and hold Shift and then hit W, notice how it's going to animate only the translation. So this is pretty fantastic, especially if you want to have very specific animation, because what happens when you click S, it's going to record a lot of keys that you don't actually need. So I'm going to do the same for rotation. I'm going to click and hold Shift and then E. So right now, let's say I'm just focusing on translate and rotation. Another thing you can do, if let's say if only one channel or very specific channels you're just animating, you select them, then Control, click and hold Control. If you want to select more, click and hold Control. Of course, if you want to select all of these, you can click and hold Shift and then click with the left mouse button. So yeah, Control or Shift. Okay, so if you want to animate specific channels or one channel, right mouse button and then key selected. Okay, so let's just keep it simple and go with the S keyboard button. Select here the object, S, and the other thing you need to know a little bit later is this button. This is going to allow automatic keying for any changes we make. So here's the cube, hit W on the keyboard so I can move it. And then keep in mind, this is one of the common mistakes. A lot of people go to the first frame and make, the key, and then right away they change the action without changing the timeline. And if you're doing a cube, that is no big deal, but if you're doing a complex animation, in so many cases, you do a lot of movement and whatsoever, and like, oh my God, I forgot to actually move the timeline. So keep that in mind. So as you can see here, any changes you make, if you actually have a key, anytime you move the time slider, it snaps back to that keyed position. So this could be, in many cases, you could accidentally hit S on the keyboard when you're doing modeling and you feel that you're having such an issue where things like, you leave something and then as soon as you change the timeline, they snap back. That means there is a key on them. So that takes me to the other issue, which is the accidental animation key. Okay, so what if you had created this case? You accidentally animated and you didn't want to. There are two ways to delete those animation keys. Either you go to the specific key on the timeline, right mouse button, and then delete. Or in some cases you could need this instead. You select the specific keys that you want to completely take out, let's say these, specifically for translate, and you want to keep the other ones. Right mouse button and then break connections. Alright, so with that said, I am here on the first position. Let me deselect these so they don't distract you. I'm on the first position here, and then I'm going to move it all the way to frame 400. Or I'm going to make it 240, so it would be 10 seconds, maybe 120 for 5 seconds. So that's the whole animation that I'm going to do. So go all the way here, and then I'm going to move the cube here. Also, I forgot to mention that this number here tells you exactly which frame you are on. So that is very useful to also navigate with. Okay, so now that I've gone to the 120 frame, notice that it didn't save because I moved the timeline before I clicked save. So going to the 120th frame, move the box, and now I'm gonna hit S. But before I click S, notice how these are in pink. What does that mean? It means that this cube has animation on it, but it does not have a key on that specific frame. But when you hit S, they're gonna become red. Okay, now I'm gonna play this animation, and notice by default you're gonna be getting the following problem. It's moving way too fast. And the simple solution for that is right mouse button here on the timeline, and then you go to the playback speed, real time. And now it's playing in real time, like exactly how it's supposed to play within 5 seconds. Let's say I want to stop it. You can use these buttons here. Let's say I'm going to stop it here, and then I'm going to push it all the way here. I'm going to hit S. So right now the movement is going to be this way. Okay, let's say you want to do a lot of wiggling. Undo, undo, undo. You want to do a lot of wiggling, but you don't want to hit S every time. So I'm gonna go now to this button and hit OK and click on it, and then now when I move forward I can move it, and then move forward, I can move it this way. I can also go to the 4 views to show it to you from the top view. Push it all the way here. And now here. So towards the end here I should have just pushed it back a little bit. So right now this is the movement that I have. Now let me introduce you to another issue that may bother you. I'm gonna hit escape, which is the shortcut for stopping the animation. Go to the 4 views. Okay, I have the perspective and I have this preview. Let's say for instance I'm gonna create a new camera, and here I'm going to turn on that camera that is supposed to show all the movement. So it's good to compose it this way. Maybe I'm gonna remove the grid. So technically it should show me everything here, but if I hit play, notice how only one of the views is actually showing the action. And the problem, it's not really a problem, it's more like a feature by default put on kind of the wrong thing, because a lot of people don't really need to save on processing power to avoid having those 4 views, because it's a play blast already, so it shouldn't be really that consuming. Maybe it was built for old machines where it used to really make a big deal to have all those 4 views playing the animation. Also, if you have a complex object, then it does make sense. So that's why by default they have that feature on. So if you go here to the gear chasing the guy, and then you go to the all, so this is going to make the playback to be seen on all of the views. Now you hit OK and it shows on all the views. Okay, so let's say now I want to have one of those keys to be pushed to be earlier or later. How do you actually select a key? Click and hold Shift, left mouse button, and then you push it right or left. Okay, so that's good. What if I want to copy this and paste it here? You stand exactly where the frame is. Now, what if I had a very long timeline? And just going specifically on that key is pretty annoying, right? Now, 2 things to say here. The first one is, if you click the comma or less than, it moves backwards to have the timeline stopping at every keyframe. And if you click on greater than or the period, then you go forward in that type of selection. Okay, that's great. Now what if I want to move frame by frame? Right now I am on frame 51, and if I want to move 1 frame forward or a couple of them, then you click and hold Alt, and then you click on the period or greater than. You can hear my keyboard. And then if you want to go backwards, you click on the comma or less than. So we're just moving on the timeline, of course, without making any animation. Okay, so with that said, this is the movement, and I'm gonna stop it here at 120. What if you want that full animation to be exactly the same, but to get faster or slower, or maybe stretched further in time or shorter? There's a preview here that's kind of hard to see. Maybe if I zoom in, you can see that arrow. So I'm gonna zoom out now. You see this arrow, and there's an arrow here. Supposedly, if we were to kind of stop here, we would see another arrow, and there are 2 arrows here. Okay, so what do these mean? This here means that you can stretch it forward or backwards. So technically the animation can take place just in a short time. Okay. What if you want to move the whole animation from one place all the way to another? That's what you do. You click on these, and then, as I mentioned before, see, I wasn't lying. We do have an arrow in here. Okay, so this is the motion that I have right now. You want to introduce to you the graph editor. It's very important. I know you may kind of feel like, oh, it's kind of scary. It may look scary, but it's not. It's your best friend when it comes to animation. So I'm gonna go here to panels, and then gonna go to panel, and then graph editor. So the graph editor here, as you can see, shows you that movement that you have. And if you select each one of these, it would tell you it's on the translate X or it's on the translate Z. And you can hit spacebar, so it would go on full screen. If you are an animator, of course, you would know these things. If you're an animator, or if you want to be an animator in the future, then one thing you could definitely use is another screen. That's why in the animation labs you always see 2 screens, because then you can go here to panels and then tear off copy, and you would drag this into a different screen so you can have full focus on those animation curves. Okay, so spacebar again. I'm gonna move this around. Let's say you want to zoom in you can actually select a key and hit F on the keyboard, just like in Maya here for objects. You can hit F and it would frame that object for you, and if you hit A, it's going to frame everything, frame all the keys versus frame focus on one object. Okay, so you can move it around whatsoever. What if you want to zoom in? Okay, so Alt and right mouse button, or you can use the scroll. Okay, so now I'm gonna give you one example of how to utilize the graph editor for things that you could definitely use, especially when it comes to turntables. So ease in and ease out. How do we eliminate the eases? We will need the graph editor. Once we open the graph editor, we select this curve and we can simply just go and click on this. And that's going to straighten it out. Similarly to how we can just simply select one key here and push it all the way, you can do the same thing here. You can select one key, hit W on the keyboard, move that key, and of course you can click and hold Shift before you select the key, and then you can see it's really locked in on the horizontal line. So yeah, it just goes straight, which is perfect for turntables. Okay, so these are the things that I wanted to mention in terms of the very basics that you need to know. Now, I want to do the same thing, but with an interesting prop, which is a car. So how do I apply camera animation to this car? Starting from scratch, I'm going to go here to create and then camera, then camera. I'm going to click on panels, and this is where you select your camera. So if I go here to the 4 views and then select this to be camera 2, one thing you need to know is that if you click on this icon here, it's going to select the camera for you. You don't need to go all the way to the outliner and whatsoever. So here's my camera. I'm going to push it down. So yeah, let's do this kind of animation. So first key, second key, and third key. Before I do so, I want to introduce you to an extremely important key feature that you may easily not know. If you select a camera and hit T on the keyboard, T as in tango, look at that. This is what's called point of interest or center of interest. Why is this super crucial? So good, so convenient. And that's because after you click T on the keyboard, then however you move the camera, it's going to always lock on that specific spot. Here's something you might also not know about Maya. If you click and hold Control, see on the cursor it shows minus. That means it's going to move the gizmo here, or the object, on both the axes except this one. Meaning, if I click here, naturally it's gonna go on the green, right? This looks nice. But if I hit Control or click and hold Control, then it's gonna isolate this one and only animate on these ones. Now check this out. You are in full control. And this is also extremely important to know, because we also can apply the same thing for something like a spotlight or even a directional light. Let me show you. If you don't believe me, how dare you? Spotlight. Hit W. Make it larger so we can see it. Now hit T on the keyboard. Okay. So if I hit 7 on the keyboard, it's going to show me the lit mode. And because I have the T activated, the center of interest, then it's going to do this. And if you have watched this video all until now, here's a bonus for you. You might not see on different videos. Look at this cool shot there. Well, let's make it even cooler and play with shadows. But we already have shadows if we were to render, right? But the problem is that you have to render to know exactly what the shadow is looking like, where it is, and what kind of role is it playing with the composition. Well, if you go here into lighting and then shadows, it actually shows you what the shadow looks like, which could be incredibly useful for such a cool composition, for instance. right? So remember, if you hit W, that point of interest disappears and it no longer gets attached to the movement of the light. But if you do hit T, then however you move it, it's going to always look at that object or wherever the center of interest is. So I'm going to click 5 on the keyboard here to go back to the shaded mode, and I'm going to go click here on the camera. So this is my camera, and I'm going to hit W because I want to have that kind of static movement without point of interest interfering. And before I start with the animation, I'm gonna give it an interesting focal length, meaning I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. 35 is kind of normal, so I'm gonna change the 35 to 300. It's gonna make it look a lot more dynamic. It's pretty good for cars like this. It sort of flattens it, as you can see, but it makes it look like a badass kind of prop. Okay, so this is the focal length that I have right now, and this is the camera that I have. You can see here I had to push the camera far away in order for it to maintain that kind of the camera in the composition, because now it is much more zoomed in, right? So the animation is going to be like this, and then I want to push it in. And at that point, I'm gonna set the point of interest where the car is. Okay, simple as that. So go up, let's start the animation. Key, and then I'm gonna play. That's good enough. Bring the camera down, and then I can also here at this point key the center of interest. Key selected because it's not keyed by default. Okay, so here hit T. I want to make sure maybe it's somewhere here. So now technically it's changing from one frame to another, the point of interest. And now I'm gonna go all the way here, and then I am going to while having the T activated, I'm gonna push the camera like this. And from inside the camera, I can actually zoom out and do the animation, which is pretty cool. This is the animation. Now let's play it. It's not making that issue, it seems. And while it's there, I am just going to go and push the point of interest somewhere where it keeps the focus on the car. So this is the animation that I have. Now, what if you want to have a pause like here, just for dramatic effect? Pause and then move after. Okay, so in that case, I want to have a copy of this frame and maybe make it somewhere here. Paste. So it gets faster to that point. And again here, making copy of the same to make sure like, hey, this is the same, you know, it's supposed to be the same. But I also want to make sure that, you know, the center of interest is also copied but not selectable from here. You cannot just select the center of interest and say like, give me the keyframes for this. Graph editor. We go here, center of interest. As you can see, here's a key for it. We don't have a key for it, so I'm gonna make a key. And it's the same and the same, but there's a difference here. Something is happening, right? Well, let me select on all of the keys here. This here is the one that is changing, and that is translate Z. So to ensure everything is going well, I go here to this key, S, S, and then S, and now it's going to key everything specifically exactly however it is, which means if I go here and copy this and go and paste, Now it's going to give me an exact copy. Here is one of the issues you will be facing. When you copy a key from one place to another, you're going to have this kind of bounce. Select the camera again, select all the keys, select all of these, and to eliminate that bounciness, you go and make it straight like this. So now technically I should be having this kind of animation. So lastly, what I want to do is to animate the focal length, because right now the focal length is pretty long, 300. So I'm going to key it from here, key selected, and go all the way here, and I'm going to push this to 15. Maybe it's too far, or maybe I can just push the camera in. Okay, so this is called Zolly. It's a mix of dolly and zoom. Check this out. Of course, this is an extremely exaggerated example, and I'll show you a much more moderate example from one of my films. Okay, so in this scene there is a dome that comes down and a soldier's kind of shield opens up and then he melts them. So I'm gonna show you the shot here and notice how to give that awkward and surprise and kind of unexpected kind of feeling, I went with the Zolly effect. So I'm gonna show you the scene here. And you can see here, like, you know, I animated the camera along with like the drop. We get to feel their feelings. I hope I didn't complicate it to the point where it felt too much, but I wanted to make sure that I introduce you to all of the possible issues, because in many cases there is this problem of, you know, you're trying to do the tutorial and it's, you know, it's going well for the guy that you're watching, and then, you know, specific things like, oh my god, why is this happening? Why didn't he or she get that same issue with the tutorial? And, you know, I wish I could fix it, but I have no idea what to Google, what to look up, what to ask, and things like that. So that's what I tried to do here in this video, just to talk about all of these possible issues. Lastly, the problem that didn't happen for me, I also want to talk about it. In some cases, when you're just playing the animation and suddenly the camera goes like way off, like this, or like kind of really crazy, like jumps as if the cameraman or woman had just a car hit them. So it's like the camera is just all over the place. So to fix that problem, you need to go into the graph editor, you select all the keys of that object, and then you go here to this curves, and then you go to Euler Filter, and the Euler Filter is gonna do its magic. All right, I hope this was helpful.